Thanks, folks. I'm not going to be standing up here at the podium. Usually my voice carries pretty well. Matter of fact, the rooms on either side will probably tell me to be quiet. As he was saying, I am with SAM Surveying and Mapping, Inc. We're one of the largest geospatial solutions providers out there with offices across the U.S. and into Canada. Here in the Southeast, we have 3 in North Carolina, 4 down in Georgia, where I'm from, and 1 in South Carolina. We are an Esri business partner, and we're the second largest Trimble user in the country, which is kind of cool. As far as general services, y'all can read this, but if it's geospatial, we do it. So we're going to jump off of the commercial that I'm required to give to be able to come and do these things and talk about GIS and surveying. Where is that boundary line at? So I have a question. How many of y'all are PLSs, licensed surveyors? Okay. How many of y'all are GISPs? Okay, it looks like some of the same folks there. So hopefully this will be something that'll be of interest to y'all. Now this is going to be my own personal opinion on that. And you may think, well, why do I care what Trip has to say about GIS and surveying where the boundary line is? Well, this is a very passionate topic for me. My dad was a licensed surveyor and engineer in the state of Georgia. So when I got big enough to carry a bush axe and a machete, he dragged my backside out of the field, and I was cut the line and pull the chain. So for those of you that are PLSs, how many of y'all have actually pulled the chain? 1, 2. How many of y'all have 3? How many of y'all have pulled a Gunther's chain? 1. How many people know what a Gunther's chain is? Okay. There we go. So I've been on both sides of this fence, right? I've worked as surveyors. I went to school in Southern Polytech in the Atlanta area, now it's Kennesaw State, to study for survey. That's what I was going to go be. I worked in survey firms. I've done a lot of that work, boundary surveys, topos, construction stakeout, you name it, I've done it. At some point, when I was filling out the form, because for the surveyor exam in Georgia, the president of the company I was working for at the time walked in and said, "Hey, Tripp, you know about computers, right?" I went, "Well, yeah, I can turn one on. I can run on it, yeah." "Oh, great, the IT guy just put, you're not the IT, you're not the IT guy." Okay, so that form went in the folder, which I still have. And that's the only reason I'm not a licensed surveyor right now, is because of that. I went into IT, and then eventually I got into GIS because I needed somebody to run the GIS group that knew databases and computer software, but also understood how field is collected or data is collected in the field, and how parcels get put together, and how the utilities work and all that. So I ended up in GIS. So I appreciate both sides of this. I was already now joke prepared and probably say, "Oh, let's just get rid of surveyors and not need it anymore." That's I figured that might not go well. But remember that there's a lot of GIS people that are also licensed surveyors here in the state of North Carolina. They do absolutely have a very important role out there. So why do we have conflict? Why is there a problem? Well, I think we need to go back and think about how each one of these two professions kind of seem to view each other. And having been on both sides of the fence, this is kind of how I've seen it out there. First off, the surveyors looking across the fence at us in GIS, they immediately think, well, GIS means get it surveyed. They got information somewhere. All they did was a bunch of junk. They weren't the ones and zeros that scored in. It's not accurate, right? We're all a bunch of computer nerds. So it's true, I am. I build my own computers. I've been interacting on. Yes, I'm a nerd. I get it. And then what we generate is a bunch of pretty illustrations. And what we do doesn't really have any basis in reality. It's not correct. It's not accurate. It is kind of fair files. Many. On our side of the fence, the GIS side of the fence, I'm going to call it our side because I'm a GIS company. I was a surveyor talking about it. Right? So when we look at the surveyor side, we think of old men. Because the average age of the surveying profession is somewhere around late 50s, early 60s, actually. They're that, "Get off my lawn, this is my territory," right? Protecting their turf. And everything has to be a survey, right? If you're going out collecting fire hydrants, regardless of what the purpose is, that should be a survey. If I'm doing tax parcel mapping, that should be a survey. You know, and everything somehow ties to property. That's kind of the generic view we have of the survey profession, the GIS side of things. So you kind of see, since we're not really viewing things in the same lens, although we do a lot of the same stuff, where the rub can start to come in. Everybody loves a good Venn diagram, right? We got to see the cross over here. So, you know, I think in general terms, there's certain things that surveyors do that us in the GIS side would not question that that's in the realm of survey. Whether it's doing legal opinions on boundaries by creating plats or deeds, legal descriptions, those things, creating any sort of data for engineering use, creating, you know, control for aerial photography or something along those lines, doing construction staking, signing off. I guarantee that this data is to this level of accuracy because of these methodologies. I think in general terms, most of us on the GIS side would say, absolutely, surveyors, we don't want any part of that. That all equals liability. I don't want any of that, right? So no real problems there. I think from the surveyor side, looking across the fence into GIS, things like combining and consolidating multiple data sets, that's not what we want to do. That's certainly within our realm. Integrating databases with other applications like CAMA permitting and stuff, again, not typically something on the surveyor side. Creating various applications, not to say surveyors can't, because I know some surveyors do, right? Or again, something we do all the time, generating enterprise databases and so on. And this is a very tailored list. I know there's a lot more things that we all do, but I had to limit it somehow. Now comes the rub, right? Field data collection. We do field data collection on GIS. Absolutely, surveyors do field data collection. Where does one stop and one start? Where do I cross that line? Data analysis. Absolutely, surveyors are analyzing data. They're looking out there. What is the monuments they're finding? If they're doing boundary retracements, is this iron pin I find in the ground the one originally called for in the original survey? Even though it's 100 feet short of what the lines show it should be. All these things they're analyzing data to generate contours, create DIMs and things. We're obviously doing the same thing. Creating maps. Yep, they create maps. So do we, obviously. And creating spatial data. See? And then I differentiate that from field collection, and then they're taking the field collected data and interpolating that into other things, like contours, like DIMs, so forth and so on. But we all do that too. This is where the rub comes in. This is why some of this conflict exists between two professions that really should be complementary. There is no reason that the two can't coexist, and we need to work together on the rest because, and I'll put on my surveyor hat for a second, there are a lot of other professions that are out there that have been trying to subvert the value that the surveying profession brings to the table. You've got lawyers, real estate agents, engineers, landscape architects, construction people, all finding ways to get by without doing surveys. I know, I'm going to give you an example here. My own sister, she bought a house not too long ago. Well, I guess it's probably both her dad, the licensed surveyor, her brother, the GIS guy, said, get it surveyed. Oh, no, I don't need to. The bank says I don't need to do that. The closing attorney says I don't need to do that. So she didn't do that. Well, a few years ago, well, no, I take it back. Let me refresh that now. This week I got an email from her saying that, oh, there's an easement on my property that I own. I didn't know I could own an easement, but you know, it's drainage easement. You're responsible for maintaining that property, making it clean, but you can't go in and do any sort of work that changes the drainage on that. And she, well, that's BS. I own it, I should be able to do what I want to it. No, there was an easement. Well, who didn't know about the easement? Got it surveyed. Right? But because real estate agent, the attorneys and all that said, oh, you don't just sign this affidavit saying, or the previous owner signed an affidavit said nothing had changed, no known encroachments existed, and the letter did report it to the court. So we know that these things, happen and why we need to work together to do that. Now, one thing I do want to make sure we understand here real quickly, because I've done some surveys in the past talking about the acceptance of certification in GIS, and I found that people get very confused over these three terms. What is having a certification versus having a license versus having a certificate are? A certification is a voluntary process that you go through to acknowledge some level of skill, expertise, or experience in a given profession. The GISP is an example of that. Do you have to have the GISP to do GIS work? No. Absolutely not. It is not a requirement anywhere. A license or licensure is a legal requirement to perform certain functions usually involved with a profession. And it's codified. Surveying is one of those. If I want to practice surveying in the state of North Carolina, I have to have a license in the state of North Carolina. Otherwise, I'm not allowed to do certain work as dictated within the state code. Okay? And certificate. That can also be referred to as a degree. It's you completed some level of training. That could be this conference, this could be a 4-year degree, it could be taking one of the classes I taught at NC State at Entry or GIS, whatever it is, you complete some level of coursework and you get a certificate recognizing that. So yes, you can have a degree. I can have a degree in land surveying but still not be a licensed surveyor. I could be a licensed surveyor and a GISP. Just because you have one doesn't mean you automatically have the other, and there's always been some confusion in that. So I wanted to make sure we understand that. One of the, I guess, other rubs that I've seen from the surveyor side looking at the GIS side is what defines the profession. How do we define what GIS is? Because I guarantee you, if I went around this room and asked each and every one of you to define GIS, every one of you would have a different definition. You would define the task performed differently, the skill sets needed to be performed differently, software used differently. So where does this come from? How do we call ourselves a profession when we don't have any one thing that really defines us? Now, there are some guidelines out there. So we have the Geospatial Information Science and Technology Body of Knowledge that was created by UCGIS, or the University Consortium of Geographic Information Science, and the American Association of Geographers, AAG. And in that body of knowledge, it lists many of the key knowledge areas that you would need to practice in GIS. General geography, coordinate systems, field collection methodologies, raster, or map algebra, data, so forth. Got a lot of that out there. During the lunch keynote, they mentioned the Geospatial Core Competency Model, or the GTCM from the Department of Labor. Actually was involved in the initial build of this back 10 years ago there. So that also lists the core competencies that you need in the geospatial arena, but that's more encompassing. It's not just GIS. It includes photogrammetry, survey, GIS, landscape work, anything that deals with geography or geospatial, some of those base levels. You can see it kind of stops at the industry sector and then goes up into management skills and all that from that point. So that helps define knowledge areas. And then lastly, we have the GISP certification that kind of helps identify, as we said, you don't have to have it, helps identify those that have met certain criteria to be called GIS professionals. I'm not saying that you're not a professional if you don't have it. I'm not trying to say that. But it also includes the code of ethics and rules of conduct that help define the practice of professional GIS out there. So we have some things, but there's no one thing that dictates it like we do with surveying. Surveying, the practice of surveying is defined by state law. It says this is the practice of surveying, these tasks, these items are considered that. This is what it takes to become a surveyor, maintain your license, this is how you can use, lose your license, and so on. The big problem with that is that there are 53, I think that's right, 53 different definitions, because you have every state plus every territory, not focusing on the U.S. I'm talking about the U.S. So if I want to practice surveying in Georgia, it's going to be very different from practicing here in North Carolina, or in South Carolina, or Florida. There's very little reciprocity across states when it comes to surveying, especially if you look at engineering. If I get a license in Georgia as a PE, it's very easy to get my license in Alabama, in North Carolina, in Alaska even, where surveying is not the case. Now, there is a group that helps with some of this called the NCEES, which is the National Council of Examiners for Engineering and Surveying. They create model laws and rules that help define surveying. They're also the ones that write some of the exams for that. But again, it's different across states. So what does all this mean for us in GIS, right? Because of the fact we don't really have a very good definition of our profession and what we can and can't do, and there's 53 different definitions of surveying, there's going to be some continued conflict between us and them unless we can kind of come together. And this is going to be exacerbated by those we serve. Right? I think last time I did a survey, working with an employee with an engineering firm, there was disputes between he and his neighbor over who owned the tree. I was out doing the field work with them, and the gentleman stopped and asked, well, oh, you surveyors? Well, yeah, okay, we're surveyors. Well, I have a lot down here, I need surveying. How much would you charge? And so I gave him a rough cost estimate. And he was like, well, that's just ridiculous. But, well, no, it's not. If you understand what it takes to do a survey, and I started outlining all that, and he was like, oh, I thought you just kind of stood on the side of the road and took a picture. It's like, no, no, we do a lot more than that if we do it right. You know, there are windshield surveyors out there. I think some of us have probably encountered those before. But it just continues to cause confusion with the people we serve, and it keeps getting devalued. So what that may lead to, and we've seen that here in North Carolina, I know, is that there may be, and I know there already is here, requirement for licensure to do even GIS work. In South Carolina, for example, they actually have a tiered license. There's a GIS licensed survey. There's a photogrammetric licensed surveyor, and there's a traditional surveyor. So if I go into South Carolina and I want to do parcel mapping or something, I've got to be at least a GIS licensed surveyor, unless I work for government. You get an exception for government. Which, okay, this is kind of a side note. The reason for licensure is to protect the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Why is that different if I'm working for the government? Right? And especially we're talking about GIS, because the largest user of GIS is the government. So I don't get that. But if we start enforcing licensure on GIS services, that also means the cost of those services are going to have to go up. Because I'm going to have to go out and get licenses in all the states that I want to do GIS work, which is going to raise that cost. So what are we doing as a community to help address this? Well, a couple of things. One, I'm doing these kind of talks. The other is, right now, URISA, who hopefully y'all have heard of, the National Society of Professional Surveyors, NSPS, and the NCES are actually just coming together to right now revamp the model law and rules that will serve as guidelines, hopefully, for the states to update their definition and all the laws dictating the practice of surveying. Okay? So this is the GIS and surveyors trying to come together and recognizing this rift exists and that we need to solve it, that we're hurting each other and we need to be working together. And this was originally done, the last time this was updated was somewhere around 2000. There were some GIS people involved. The problem was once they came up with the new definition, there was no real plan to go around and try to get states to adopt it, right? The idea here is if we can do this, it's going to remove the conflict between the two professions. Plus, if each state has similar laws and requirements, then reciprocity between states is going to be easier. So if I get a license in North Carolina, getting my license in South Carolina or Virginia is going to be much easier.
very similar to what the engineers are able to do now that surveyors can't. So there's some good reasons to make this happen. Is there going to be pushback? Yes. So what we're doing here, and I think I'm getting short on time, so I'm going to jump here. What we will hope to do with this redefinition is instead of defining survey based on tools used, accuracy requirements, those kind of things, is let's define survey based on the data usage. Right? It doesn't matter if you want to collect the data with survey grade GPS, that's still not surveying unless it's being used for one of these dedicated or dictated uses like engineering design, boundary determination. Right? All of those are going to be definite surveyor things. It's used that way. If it's just doing a general sign inventory, where you're just trying to get the number of signs out there, then it doesn't matter if you use survey grade GPS to do that inventory, it wouldn't be necessarily a survey. So we're going to more easily define when is a survey or surveyor absolutely required versus when one doesn't have to be. Right? So really get rid of that ambiguity. So our customers, the people we serve, know when is it required to have a survey and when is it not. It's going to make life a lot easier. And then we can work together and really make sure people understand the value that surveyors bring to the table, because they do. They bring a lot of value in there. They know the ins and outs of data accuracy, data adjustments, all those kind of things. So we want to make sure that they are recognized and everybody knows when they're allowed to do the work, because as a GIS professional, I don't want to step into the surveyor's realm. That's not what I want to do. I value what they bring to the table, and I want to remove that conflict. Right? Also, how many of y'all have heard of the, oh shoot, now I can't think of the name. Siteplan.com out of California lawsuit that's going on? How many of y'all have heard of that? Okay. So for those that don't know, the California Licensing Board issued a cease and desist letter to a company that had a website that somebody could go on, basically pull their property data from public records and kind of do a rough sketch of, well, I want to put my new storage shed here. Print it off, and they could take that to get preliminary permitting and approval from their local government, right? The surveying board said, nope, that's surveying without license, you must stop. So there's been an ongoing fight. And since then, there's been like 6 other companies that did similar stuff that have had similar letters issued and lawsuits pending on that. So we're hoping, ERISA is working on this to say that's overreach, right? There's nothing here. And by the way, this company had disclaimers all over the place. This is not a survey. It's not for you need to get a survey. They have disclaimers all over the place on their website and on the printed products on there. So this is one of the things we're trying to address. There's a similar thing happening in Pennsylvania, I think, as well, with another similar company there. But the idea here is if this happens, if the survey board is able to put a stop to that, put that company out of business, then you bet every other state is going to start looking at that. So again, very important stuff to keep track of. I know we've had some issues here in North Carolina. It's been quiet for a number of years, thankfully, but we want to make sure it doesn't happen. So that's kind of where my thoughts are, that it's really more about how the data is going to be used as opposed to how it's collected. And then we really need to be working together. We can benefit each other and really help the citizens and the public who are out there really trying to serve and protect. Get better products, better explanations, and just the whole protected health, safety, and welfare will be a much better. So, with that, folks, any questions? Comments? Yes.
Not a question, but
Sure.
comment that North Carolina DC had a working group for professional land surveyors and GIS, and they discussed this topic, ironically, visited at PCL's office, and said there is information about their findings and so forth available on the GICC website. That was in
So, yeah, North Carolina has kind of been leading some of the charge on this because they all had some of the
Worst situations a few years ago, it had to be worked through.
you know, get some companies that got put out of business. Any other questions, comments? Okay, well, thank y'all folks, hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. And I'll be back.